Why is race such a pervasive and important predictor of economic outcomes in contemporary societies, despite the fact that we have seen several decades of anti racist policies implemented both nationally and internationally? Last week, we explored some examples of how race has direct effects on the lives and livelihoods of individuals. In our exploration of redlining, for example, we tried to observe how decisions taken by the state or the government back in the 1920s and 30s had long ranging implications on how different racial groups could accumulate wealth in the form of home equity. By defining certain districts and cities as less worthy of investments than others, and in a language that was clearly racialized, the state created forms of discrimination that persisted even after many decades of civil rights interventions. This example shows one of the key ways in which sociologists and other social scientists have made sense of the role of race in the economy. In particular, this explanation of redlining stresses the role of what is called a macro actor, the state, in reproducing racialized discrimination over time. On the other side of the spectrum of explanations, social scientists have also studied micro interactions and micro moments that lead to racialized outcomes. For example, the paper on experimental markets is based only on interactions of individuals rather than any analysis of larger institutions like the states or government. Similarly, the forms of racialized discrimination discussed in terms of biases in the hiring process in firms are based on the actions and decisions of individual social agents. These are said to be micro accounts of race, society, and the economy. This week, we will consider the space between the macro and the micro by looking at the work on racialized organizations. Organizational life is central to society and the economy. Firms, companies, universities, hospitals, non governmental organizations are all organizations and are implicated in the production of distinct economic and social outcomes. They are furthermore not reducible to individuals or to something as large and complex as the state. Rather, organizations exist in the middle between the micro interactions of everyday life and the macro institutions of society at large. How do organizations matter for the reproduction of racial economic inequalities? At the core, organizations make decisions about the worth and qualities of the individuals that inhabit them, and by recurring to racialized conceptions of the world, they actively reproduce inequalities and stereotypes into the future. Victor Ray offers a telling account of how racialized organizations operate in the world. They do so in particular by diminishing the role and capacities of some racial groups over others, and constituting forms of valuation that are based on whiteness as a key credential within the organizational space. Now, this does not mean that discrimination happens all the time in a directed and purposeful manner, but rather that it is ingrained in how organizations make sense of the value of their members in relation to racialized hierarchies of worth. Some employees, some members are seen as more capable of certain types of tasks than others, simply because of this reflection of a racialized notion of competencies and abilities. Now, importantly, Racialized organizations make justifications about these racialized hierarchies in order to avoid systemic change. These are taken for granted. These are matters of fact that reproduce racial inequalities day by day into the future through organizational work.